Hello everyone, we have done a few episodes together with John McNally about depression, and today we would like to continue on some case studies. And John has prepared for us some case studies. We will go through with it, and hopefully you're gonna ask us also the questions what you have in your mind. My name is Gökçen Pürsoken, and I'm making these videos from Basel, Switzerland, together with John McNally.
I'm just going to give two examples, and these are two basic case studies. I just want to make clear that they're not based on any one person. They're actually a compilation of a bunch of people, and I've just written it up like I would normally write up my case notes at the end of a first session, actually. And the name I've chosen to use in each case, they're actually my siblings. I've got 3 brothers and 3 sisters, so I've decided to use their names as the patient, the identified patient. I'm just going to work through and I'll discuss just what goes on from my side based on what people are saying to me in order to make sense of and to come up with a diagnosis. So I'm going to ask Gökçen to read the first case study and then we'll talk about it.
The first example is Katie is a 19-year-old single woman who is in her first year of university studying economics. She lives with her parents and has a steady boyfriend who is also studying economics. She's supported by her parents and a student loan. Katie reports feeling depressed and irritable since starting university and that her mood is negatively affecting her grades and her relationship with her boyfriend. To the latter, she says they seem to argue a lot right now and she has no sex drive, which also puts pressure on the relationship. She used to be an avid writer, contributing short stories to her school newspaper, but now feels uninterested in writing. She says mostly she just wants to stay home and be alone. She is missing her lectures at university, has difficulty focusing on her studies, and is not engaged in any social activities. She stays in touch with a few friends via social media but rarely meets them in person. Katie has a flat affect and tends to respond in short sentences. She complains of physically not feeling well, although she is unspecific about what is ailing her. She frequently has difficulty getting to sleep, wakes several times during the night, and feels unrested in the morning. Her diet is unchanged. Katie drinks about 1 bottle of wine a week, usually on weekends, and admits to occasional cannabis use but no other drugs. She says that she smokes cannabis to take the edge off and to just numb out. Increasingly, she finds herself watching Netflix or just scrolling. There's no family history or depression, although Katie says she frequently felt this way since puberty. She says she has low self-esteem and engages in negative self-talk pretty much daily. She has fleeting thoughts of suicide when she's feeling down but has no plan, denies intent, and there is no history of attempts.
So normally in session I take rough notes and then I will formalize it much like this at the end of the session. If you were to go in with many psychologists, psychiatrists and that, they would spend a lot more time going into the history. My write-ups are about a page long. Their write-ups will be 8 to 10 pages long. So they go into much more detail in order to come up with a diagnosis. As I've said before, because the type of therapy I do, CBT, I don't require so long an in-depth understanding of the history because the diagnosis itself is less an issue for me because I'm using a transdiagnostic, which means essentially the diagnosis is less relevant. In this case, I usually start with someone and I just ask them to explain why they've come in to see me. Most people find this difficult to know where to start because they find it unsure. But in fact, the reason I'm asking it this way is I want them to start where they think it's most relevant. And then I'll ask a series of questions all the way through, which will give me the information which I now wrote down in this report. The first part of the thing that I look for, some basic idea of what they're doing in their life. In this case with Kathy, she's going to university studying economics. So that's sort of a general overview of her orientation in the world. The second and third thing I look at is where is she living and how is she making money. And the reason for that is very straightforward. If I'm to work with someone with depression, they don't have a place to live, they're living on the street, then this becomes the priority. Changing this will take priority over treating the depression. The same thing with money. If they have no income coming in, they can't afford food, how are they getting by? So we have to stabilize the social sort of aspects of life, the basic stuff in life, and I have to make sure that that's all sorted before I go on with the treatment of depression in this case. So normally I put that at the front of my report. 3 paragraphs really are all about the symptoms. You'll see as the way I write it up It's more of a storyline about what's going on and what she's saying. But if you were to take the symptoms, which I talked about in a previous video, the symptoms of depression, and just match it up to the story that I present, you'll see that what I'm actually doing is checking off boxes in terms of symptoms that she's talking about, so that I can then say, I'm pretty sure she's depressed, right? Which is the diagnosis. So I will go in and I will talk about kind of how she's feeling in the world, her relationships to other people, how she's functioning on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to look for how she responds in the moment to the questions I'm asking. So it's not just the story of what's going on in her life, but it's how as I'm talking to her, how is she responding? So in this case, she's got a flat affect, which means she's not showing any emotion. I know that this is symptomatic of anhedonia, which is essentially flat affect. And responding in short sentences just means that what she's doing is she's shrinking her world down. She's trying not to engage in a conversation with me. She's trying to just keep everything contained. Again, this notion of containment is also a sign of depression. She complains of not feeling well, but can't identify a specific problem. So this is the general body ache, somatic pain-related stuff that comes with depression. She has problems sleeping, so a sleep disturbance, also irritable. So this is just a list of the symptoms as we walk down, and I just record them in a story-like manner instead of checking off the boxes. And the reason I'm doing that is we're using the context of what she has said to me to come back in the second half of my assessment. And I'll explain that in a second. The next thing I always talk about is drug alcohol use. She's drinking about a bottle of wine a week. Bottle of wine, 750 milliliters, about 5 drinks. That's about what she consumes in a week. So just to be clear with that, I'll do a whole thing on substance use disorder. But essentially there are no safe limits in terms of how much you drink. The question isn't so much how much she's drinking, although that's a variable. The question is, why is she drinking what she's drinking? Is she drinking it when she's in low mood states? Is she drinking it when she's socializing? Is she drinking that she may consume 1 bottle a week, but she may do that in one evening, right? In which case she's drinking to intoxication. So these all tell me different things about where she's at in terms of her stability. Also the drug use, in her case she does a bit of cannabis, but you'll notice she's doing it to take the edge off. This edge is that irritability she's feeling that comes with the depression. And she's trying to numb out. She's also doing things online, either Netflix or just scrolling, say on TikTok or whatever. She's just sort of trying to essentially do what depression does, which is tries to keep you from actively engaging in the world. Lastly, I talk about suicide attempt or any suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempt, what it looks like for that person, because I need to assess whether I've got an immediate problem that needs to be addressed or whether I'm working with a problem. In her case, she has some thoughts of suicide, but not enough for me to be overly concerned. She has them occasionally, they're fleeting, she has no intent of doing anything. They are of a concern, but they're going to be of a concern inside the treatment of depression and not separately as a thing in and of itself. So my summary in this case comes down to this. Kathy is a 19-year-old woman currently suffering from a major depressive episode. Preliminary discussion about CBT suggests that she should respond well to this form of treatment. So what I do after I get all this information from Kathy, the second part of the initial assessment is I go into a talk about CBT. And I'm going to take the stories she's told me and show how CBT uses those stories to help her engage in CBT, into the form of treatment. So I'm going to take, say, for example, she may say, I can't sleep, I'm always irritable. And I'm going to key on can't and always, which are imperatives. I'm going to key on those 2 words, and I'm going to show her what happens when you use those 2 words, what happens in the brain, and the demand on the brain. Because those words demand 100% response in one direction. I'm going to turn around and say, if you tell your brain you can't do something, it means there's no wiggle room, there's no latitude. 100% going in one direction, it's the very stuff that applies pressure to the brain that causes the stress. All we have to do is tweak the word, and it's not difficult. It's simply saying, sometimes I feel like I can't do it, but sometimes I can. Now you've built into the story that you're telling yourself, you've built into some wiggle room. And that wiggle room allows the brain to settle differently. It's the very stuff that Kathy's going to tell me as she's describing what's going on that I use in the second part to explain what CBT is and how it works. That usually closes out my first session with the person, and by the end, typically, they've done two things. They've got the opportunity to express how they feel and to get something off their chest, and secondly, they've learned something about how their mind works in order to give them the emotion of being depressed. And that's really the objective at the end of it, is to be able to do those two things.
Yeah, I was curious of that. How is it to understand, okay, the session has been gone well, you could identify what the problem is, you gathered all the information. So for Kathy's perspective, let's say, what can she expect afterwards? How would she feel after the first session or second session?
So usually after the first session, people feel this. They feel hope. That's usually what they walk away with. They feel like they've been heard, so someone has listened to them, heard what they had to say, and at the end of it, they start to see a different way of looking at the problem than the way they have been looking at it. And the consequence is that they start to feel hope. They start to think that maybe there is a way out of this mess. So that's usually the way that they feel. If you think about it in terms of where they go next, a lot of this will come down to their motivation to work on the problem. What usually comes up in the next few sessions is I start to get a sense of the level of resistance. Mm-hmm. And it's that level of resistance, which is part of the problem, that we next need to work on. And that thing can take a number of sessions, or it can go very quickly. It just depends on the individual and how ready they are to tackle the problem. So everybody is different and unique in this way. But basically, once you get over the level of resistance, then using the techniques inside CBT, you can actually maneuver yourself out fairly quickly. No, it's a good question, actually. Okay, so it's a good question because the people come away with different things. The other thing is not everyone likes this form of treatment. And so they may look at me at the end of it and say, yeah, this isn't really going to work for me. In which case I would then refer them on to someone else who does a different style than I do. It's not always 100% fit. Different people have different sort of things that fit with them. And that's basically what we do.
You are taller than me anyway. I look small.
Yeah, because it's down further. That's why I had to get out of there.
That's okay.
So I look like a little kid.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start.